Welcome back to another episode of My Trauma's Chronic, but I'm Chronic. In this episode, we're honoured to have Detective Daley Jones as our special guest. Daley is not only a dedicated detective in the Metropolitan Police, but also an influential advocate for neurodivergent individuals. As the co-chair of the ADHD Alliance, co-secretary of an ADHD adult charity, and a trustee of ADHD Liberty. Daley brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the conversation. Join us as we delve into the challenges faced by neurodivergent individuals in the criminal justice system and explore Daley's invaluable insights on supporting people with ADHD when in custody. So without further ado, let's get started. So, could you tell us more about your role as the co-chair of the ADHD Alliance and how it impacts the neurodivergent community?
Hello. Yes. So I set up the ADHD Alliance originally because of issues I'd had after being diagnosed and trying to get help within work internally, because there was no real understanding of there was no support for ADHD. We had an autism support group who are brilliant people, but the conditions that different that when we went along to their sort of meetings and things, it didn't really resonate. So originally the group was set up by me and a colleague because there wasn't any sort of bespoke support for people with ADHD. So that's how it all kind of started. We sort of started that in February last year, and quite quickly that it became very apparent to us very fast that there was a real need for support of ADHD within policing. And that doesn't surprise me at all, knowing what I know about ADHD. I think it's a job, policing is a job that attracts people with ADHD. So within where are we now? We're in December 23, and I think we've got over 600 members nationwide now. So we very quickly opened up to let people in from other parts of the country, other police officers and police staff. So that's the kind of one real element of what we do. So supporting people internally, helping people out, giving them advice and support. But then the other kind of side of that coin is more kind of my own interest in neurodiversity within the criminal justice system and trying to help people neurodiverse people as they come into contact with the police. And that's kind of work I do aside from running the ADHD Alliance. The ADHD Alliance is more sort of internal welfare and support, whereas I try and do quite a lot of stuff where I can to help outside of that people we come into contact with. Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense.
Super.
And
Thank
you
you.
know what? It seems like a very, like, this is where I'm kind of like signpost for you to an already, hmm. It will come out in January, but like I just mentioned, we did an interview with the police officer, Jeff Booth. He mentioned the same sort. He was talking to me and I was like, oh my God, that's such ADHD qualities.
Mm,
Like he was like talking about, you can't do the same thing all the time. I wouldn't have the capacity to do that. I need to be challenged, not just physically, but mentally as well. And I
yeah.
was just like, a lot of it. And with I don't know, with our impulsivity and stuff like that, it also is like we can act quicker,
Yeah. And
respond.
what other jobs could you go and do where you've got like a ready supply of dopamine, if it's like physical activity like flying around in police cars or, police horses, bloody speedboats, all of that sort of stuff. But I'm a detective, so I've always kind of got my dopamine out of the sort of live, like quick time investigations and having to get information fast. And as you kind of say, it's a job that I am a police officer, but within my time in policing, I've done about 25 different roles, and the amount of people with ADHD who you meet who have like barely managed to keep a job for like 2 years because they've got bored, not because they weren't good at it, because they got bored. And policing allows people to chop and change quite a lot, so it's good for that as well. Yeah.
Don't correct me if I'm wrong, but don't police officers who are in front line do that 6 month switch where they do something else,
So
or is that just a thing in London? I don't.
So when you're starting, there's a lot of that, and if you're in certain detective roles, you can there's often rotation. But if you're in a kind of uniform response role, if you want to stay within that role, you kind of do get left alone, really. But even within uniform work, there's lots of different types of roles you can do. So like you can be a traffic cop, you can be in the Met, it's called the TSG, which is kind of the sort of easy way of putting it, sort of the riot police, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's endless. It's endless, and yeah, there's something, and there's something for everyone as well. So it does lend itself to, and I guess as well, there's a certain amount of empathy that comes with ADHD, and I certainly know that there's always been this drive within me to try and help people, and whatever people believe about you know policing and I appreciate there is a lot of political debate around that, but fundamentally most people who do the job want to help people, and I think that's something that lends itself to ADHD as well.
Yeah, and I feel like, not all, but majority of police officers, do have the right intentions, but like they say, few rotten apples does ruin the bunch, and it
Yeah,
just
yeah. I mean, I can't sit here and pretend that policing does not have a problem with culture, and everything that I could say has already been said after the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and the Casey review, and there is a massive issue with in culture within policing, not just in the Met but in other police forces as well. So but fundamentally, I've worked for the Met since 2007, so quite a long time now, and I like to say that the majority of people I've worked with wants to do good. But yeah, it doesn't excuse the people that we employ that are terrible people. So the ones that
yeah,
are people, and it's not just we employ terrible people. There is cultural issues that need to change within policing fundamentally.
yeah. I feel like that is like, I do I'm a youth parliamentarian from the Merton Local Authority, so we have a youth parliament there, and a few other police officers, came. They are the neighbor, I think like neighborhood the neighborhood superintendents
Cool.
of two parts of Merton, and they come and they pretty much saying there is a culture that needs to be changed. I feel like it's it's great to hear people, say that, because
Mm,
often, when you hear messages from the police, it's from people who are usually really, really high up, and it
yeah.
doesn't really truly reflect because overall they are in charge and
Mm,
they are basically running the service.
mm.
Um, and you can't be like, oh my God, this is the work I do, but this is all the shit things I do, Like I'm responsible for overall.
Well, I mean, it's the people who are the highest up in the organization. I mean, okay, it's everyone's responsibility to change culture, but it's you know fundamentally, I can only do so much, and I'm trying to do everything I can, certainly from a neurodiverse point of view, in terms of helping people and recognizing difference and giving people a fair chance. I'm trying to do everything within my power, but fundamentally, there's only so much I can do. I am a low rank. I'm a detective constable. I'm kind of, I don't mean this in a derogatory way. I'm kind of bottom of the pile in terms of the rank structure.
Mm,
It's the people at the top of the organization, the ones that need to fundamentally make change, and that's you know they need to do that. And even though it's true that these things take a long time, cultural change takes a long time, it's not an excuse not to implement it, if that makes sense.
yeah.
Mm,
Um, so talking about implementing,
mm,
due to, people not implementing accessible accommodations,
mm.
as a detective in the Metropolitan Police, what are some of the unique challenges you face in your work, particularly in relation to supporting individuals with ADHD?
One of the biggest issues, Rosemary, is that people would assume that neurodiversity or neurodivergency awareness training would be mandatorily part of the police officer's
Yeah.
training, given the unique challenges that come with communication with individuals who've got different neurodivergent needs. But it's not. So fundamentally, that's the biggest challenge. And I know that if someone was having a conversation with me and that, let's just say we're at this conversation we're having now, and there was a TV playing over here. You can't see, but a TV was playing. Am I going to be giving you my full attention? Well, no, I'm not. No, I think that'll be a challenge for most people, especially me and my ADHD. So when we're talking about getting evidence from someone with ADHD, why would we not take those things into? I mean, that's a very simple example, but if an officer doesn't know that their radio return really up or really high is going to be a distraction to that person they're talking to with ADHD, well, that's a problem because we're trying to get the best account of that person, be they a victim, be they a witness, be they a suspect for a crime. It's and that's a really simple example. I'll give you another one. I did my sergeant's exam last year in policing, and I was given a reasonable adjustment to a break in the middle of it because it was recognised that I can't sit there for 3 hours and maintain full focus, which is good. We wouldn't have those same considerations for someone who's been interviewed either as a witness or a suspect. So, and fundamentally, that's a big problem. It's a problem internally as well because we have people who need help and they have managers who don't understand their conditions. But then, the people we meet on a daily basis will have some unique challenges around communication, and we're not meeting them, and that's a problem, and that's
And
bad.
I feel like it's like my experiences with the police, where I feel like that's the closest things I could, relate to in those situations, whether it's a mental health call or, it- whether you're distressed or not, your autism and your ADHD is still there. And it's
Yeah,
like when somebody starts getting like start banging their head. I know police officers don't really like people banging their head. I've noticed that very much. They very much get very overprotective, and you're banging your head, and you're like, how can this stuff be prevented? But he's like, okay, you can turn your radio down. When you're speaking to me, we're just in the same room, we don't, there's no need to shout. And because somebody else is distressed and they're overstimulated, and because they're loud, you think that you need to be loud as well, but you really don't. They're
no,
here. They can process everything that's going on. It might not be right in that moment. It might be 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, but everything eventually does get processed.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I I I've got ADHD and dyspraxia, so I also understand there's challenges around people understanding physical demands. If someone asked me to do something specifically with my hands and stuff, I probably would get a little bit confused. And how that can get people into issues. You think about when we're stopping and searching for people and making those kind of requests. But then, I don't have autism, so there's challenges to autism that I don't I don't have lived experiences of, but I do understand enough about autism to understand that people with autism can take things very literally and might say things quite bluntly. And it's not being rude; it's just literally giving you the information that you requested. And if you weren't specific enough, you're going to get a non-specific answer. And again, can you see how that can lead to arguments and misunderstandings? And again, it's just a very small amount of awareness can go a very long way to affecting someone's experience of policing. And as I say, I say that as I'm talking about literally witnesses, victims, and suspects. Because as a detective, my job was to get the best information out of all three of those groups. So out of the victims of crime, I wanted to hear what had happened to them and understand their story. Out of the witnesses, I wanted to understand what they'd seen in as clear detail as possible. And from the suspects I'd speak to in an interview, I want them to understand what's being brought, what the evidence is, and give them the opportunity to explain themselves if they wish to. Obviously, you can go no comment, but they still need to understand the questions, even if they're answering no comment. So all of that is communication. If you ask me what's the biggest skill to being a police officer, it's communication. It's the ability to talk to somebody at any rank, any level. That is the biggest, most important skill. There's other elements that come with that, but that's the biggest. And we're talking about something that's fundamentally changes the way people communicate. And if we don't have an understanding of that, when we're not going to give those people a fair chance. All three of those groups. It's as simple as that, to my mind. There you go. That was my TED talk.
All you have to be like is like, thank you for attending my TED talk.
Yeah. Thank you. Much love. See you in 2024. But yeah.
I feel like, it's also it's the things that I know with my autism, my ADHD, the things that I may say will sound either very stark and
Yeah.
very like, for example, I don't mind in a police interview. Somebody before we went into the police interview, a lawyer spoke to me. It was all prepared. I went in, the lawyer spoke to me, and she was like, "Oh, they said that you did this," and I was like, "No, I did not do that. That is not me. If I was going to do something, I would go do X, Y, Z, and that's what I would do. But no, I definitely did not do that because that's not what I would do." And people be like, usually people be like, "No, I didn't do it. No, I had nothing to do with that," and not just give examples of how they would do things. And if I said that in an interview, that would bring on a whole uh, uh, barrage of questions.
Well, you're also making one of the points I was going to make. You're quite clearly an intelligent person, and I consider myself a fairly intelligent person. But there are certain occasions where I might need some help around communication, aka an appropriate adult. So I would genuinely say, if I was being interviewed, let's say I was being interviewed by a police officer, and it was something to do with financial crime, and so involved a lot of numbers, I do not believe I would be able to advocate for myself properly in that process, because I don't have a diagnosis of dyscalculia, but I do believe I've got it. Maths is a challenge to me. And so I do not believe I'd be able to answer questions. I do not be able to defend myself properly. So I would want someone there. But you would look at me, you'd see a 39-year-old man who's had a career his entire life, has a mortgage, has a wife, has two children. What is your disability? What is your challenge? And that's the thing, we're not questioning it. There's no understanding. There's no understanding. And yeah, there's so many facets and things that come with neurodivergence that we just, again, just fundamentally, yeah, we need to be able to, I need to be able to ask you when you come into the police station, what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and do my best to meet your needs.
Yeah, and I feel like I forgot what I was gonna say.
Sorry,
It's okay, don't worry. No, like it's just like it's fine. It's no, it's gone. What are we talking about? And I feel like it's also what. Oh yeah, this is what I was gonna say. If somebody, if somebody didn't speak English, you get them an interpreter. If somebody is deaf or mute, you might get them a sign language interpreter. So, what's the difference between this and this? Is it because that we speak English to whatever degree that you can't see the additional needs because it's not something basic
I
or
think
that's common?
well, I'm going to rewind ever so slightly, because all of these problems I'm talking about within policing, in terms of understanding neurodiversity, are problems that are present within society. And when you understand that police officers are made up of the people from society, that in some way explains it. Now, it doesn't excuse policing from training people about these things, but I would suggest that this problem that exists around invisible disabilities, and so if you can't speak, all right, it's invisible, but it presents itself. So it's, I wouldn't necessarily put it in that category. you wouldn't dream of saying some of the things that you would say to we hear about autism and ADHD and dyslexia and dyspraxia. You wouldn't dream about saying those things to somebody in a wheelchair. You just wouldn't do it. You
Hmm.
wouldn't do it. And I think that's one of the reasons why people will not see you and me as potentially having higher needs, because you and I are both capable of being quite eloquent, quite intelligent, quite, but there's not seeing beyond that, because there's not that understanding of the other things that we might struggle with. And I think, and I already mentioned that neurodiversity awareness training isn't part of a police officer's mandatory training, but it's also not part of a teacher's mandatory training. That's even more of an issue, I'd argue, than it is for a police officer, because these are the people we fundamentally require, hoping are going to pick up on these things at the earliest possible opportunity and give children the best chance to thrive. So, I only have license to be able to really make changes within the criminal justice system, but the problems start way beyond that in education. So,
You can say that again louder for the people at the back of the room. That
well, it's
is
a societal
so
issue.
true.
Well, fundamentally, though, let's just say, so I was quite lucky at school, and I consider the reason I'm a police officer and not ended up sort of in criminality is fundamentally because I'm white, British, and middle class. They're the reasons fundamentally, and I was lucky enough to have a fairly stable family unit. I'd say they're the reasons why I was able to stay on the straight and narrow. You take people that maybe weren't afforded the opportunities that I was afforded, and might have come from a poorer background, so less access and less privilege, and they're at school struggling to concentrate. And let's think about the fundamental rules of school. You sit still, you look at what's been going on the whiteboard. There's a very linear neurotypical way of doing the national curriculum. Well, people with neurodivergence buck against that, and what happens when we buck against it? We're told we're troublemakers. And what happens when we're troublemaking at school? We get detention. What happens when we get detention? We start to get excluded. And what happens when you get excluded? You're pushing these people who have already feel like outsiders towards criminality. And then you look at the potential traits of things like ADHD in particular, I'd say, then the traits of my condition, when put in a certain when certain scenarios, lend themselves to potential criminality. That impulsivity, that risk taking, the potential, the fact that we have very addictive personalities. It doesn't surprise me that there's this pathway that happens between for neurodivergent kids between school and ending up in the criminal justice system. And so this is what I mean about, it's a societal issue. It's not just policing. Policing is part of it, but it stems through the entirety of society. Another
I
TED talk.
feel like education is one of the reasons why people end up in the criminal justice system.
100%,
Like, is the
100%.
biggest factor.
I wholeheartedly, because you have a system that hasn't really changed in in hundreds of years. The way we teach, the way we understand school. Don't get me wrong, it is changing, and I think it has to change because the world is changing in terms of technology and the way we do things. But until we fully embrace neurodivergence and have a full understanding of neurodivergence, and until the day that we don't have to go out of our way to make reasonable adjustments, it's just part of what happens, then we're always going to have this issue, because we're always going to feel like the outsider. We're always going to have these issues. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I feel like, um like autism, ADHD, or like neurodivergence, or any sort of disability is
Mm.
not a disability. It's like you've I feel like it's called a disability because the world stops you from being yourself.
You're kind of saying one of the things I always say, or as me, is that if someone asked me if I consider myself disabled, I'd say no. But what disables me is the structures of society and education, workplaces, and higher education that do not enable me to succeed. So if if I go into, as I already gave the example earlier on of the exam I did, if I did that exam was expected, not wasn't given a break, that you're disabling me because I've got a problem focusing. I will not be able to focus for 3 hours solidly. So by not giving me that break, you're disabling me. By not maybe giving me some software that would allow me to check my long, boring documents, you're disabling me because that sort of thing is an issue for me. And this is what we're doing to kids at school. If we're not giving them adjustments to meet their neurodivergent needs, we're disabling them. So I'd say most neurodivergent people wouldn't consider themselves, well, I might be speaking for a community here, wouldn't necessarily consider themselves disabled, but it's the structures that we live in and societal understanding it that debilitates people. That's my opinion.
Beautifully said.
Thanks.
If we went off on a tangent, that's the most ADHD thing ever.
Neurodivergent people talking, relevant tangents, relevant tangents.
They
Relevant
are
tangents.
relevant.
Yeah.
Definitely are. This is an important question. Like we've rescheduled, not just because of you, me as well. You do 300 things in one go.
Pretty much, yeah.
And I'm like, how do you balance all these various roles and responsibilities? And
Hey,
how
for
do they,
yourself, you do quite a lot.
it's like, but it's like, I feel like, I don't know
Um,
what to say back to that. I was like, oh,
but I get what you're saying. I don't, even though I sometimes moan about it and I know it's a challenge, can't imagine living any other way. Like there's almost like a beauty to the chaos. And and the reason I do so much is because, I mean, fundamentally, it's worth pointing out that all of the stuff I do around neurodiversity has nothing. It's not my day job. I have a day job, and then there's the welfare side of things, and then there's the advocacy for um, you know for neurodiversity in the criminal justice system. It does feel like I'm a man of many hats, but I enjoy it. It gives me a buzz, and it gives me my dopamine. I've just got to, like, I'm sure that you're the same, and I'm sure a lot of neurodiverse people who are listening.
burnout.
Yeah, it's just finding that balance between doing all this stuff, and it's brilliant, but also trying to find some time to unwind and stop and relax. And I'm getting better at that, believe it or not. Even though I'm taking on more and more and more, I do try and set boundaries. I do try and not do things in my relaxed time. Sometimes I have to. Like this, for example, I mean, I wouldn't have had that opportunity otherwise, but I do consider talking to you quite relaxing, so that's a good thing. But yeah, but I think this is stuff you learn. I mean, I was only diagnosed with ADHD in April 21, so I still consider myself really young in this journey. So a lot of the things I'm having to go through when I have gone through periods of burnout and the world collapsing, that's lessons I am sort of learning ish. You'll see.
I'm just like, there was somebody like that said, "Oh my God, Rosemary, you should relax," and I'm like
Yeah.
I do a lot. I get like
Yeah.
to a point where I could burn out, but
Yeah.
they said, "Oh, Rosemary, you should relax," and I'm like, "Relax? What do you mean relax?" And then
Mm.
I started stimming excessively. I was like going like,
I'm always doing. I'm literally always. I don't stop. This does not stop. I do this pretty much from the moment I wake up in the morning to the moment I go to bed. It's always with me. I've done this since the age of 4, and I didn't understand why. I've tried modern fidget spinners and toys, but this piece of plastic is always. It's not the same one. That would be insane. I lose things quite a lot.
"Oh,
Yeah, and that, to my mind, so in a way, I'm theoretically always on the go in some way, shape, or form. But that's how I've lived 39 years. I'm doing all right. So, it's not perfect, but we're getting by.
uh, it's the I'm doing all right." Like trying to convince me. Uh, it's I feel like it's just like I enjoy working. I enjoy doing so many different things. I
Yeah.
enjoy being like, oh my God, I got a meeting at 3 a.m. with somebody from Australia.
but this is it. This is like it's a question. You sometimes see people talk about neurodiversity as a superpower, and I personally am not a big fan of that because it, to my mind, diminishes the challenges that come with it. However, what we're just talking about there, thriving in chaos, that is one of our strengths. We are capable of doing that. Now, don't get me wrong, it stresses me out, and I do have autistic traits around planning and things like that. So when things go out the window, they are stressful, but I thrive in this chaos. So we make it work. I handed in every single piece of my university coursework, bar a couple of bits, on time. I did it about 10 minutes before, but I was able to do it because that's how I work. And this is why, again, questions you asked, but this when people say to me, why do you consider diagnosis so important at any age? Because I meet a lot of people from doing my work who look to get diagnosed much older than me. I was 36 when I was diagnosed, but I'm talking about people in their 40s, 50s, 60s. And they will meet people like occupational health and doctors and friends who say, well, why are you bothering to get diagnosed now? Well, because when are you too old to understand how your brain works and why you do the things you do? You're never too old for that. And once you understand that, you're able to work with some of those traits. And yeah, you're able to once you fundamentally understand something and why you react and do things the way you do, you can work with it a bit more. Still not perfect, but I work a lot better with these
With
things.
it is a bit strong, with
Well,
it.
yeah, I'm not cool the slightest. I want to make that very clear. I wasn't cool when I was younger, let alone now.
Does your children, what, they're a bit too young for this, do they remind you that?
Oh, I mean, they will do all the time. What's weird is I'm at 39. I'm kind of on the cusp of still understanding what kids are talking about today, but very much starting to tip towards what are you on about. I kind of feel like I'm on the cusp now. I'm there. It's only going one direction. I'm just going to be, yeah, what are you on about? Yeah, afraid so. Afraid so. Hey
You
ho,
know
I'm
what?
sure.
I feel like this is like so like I don't mind this being kept in the podcast, but this made me just like feel a bit like I have this like father-like thing. Anyway, his name was Danny,
Mm.
and he has ADHD. Like oh my God, he him without medication. I'm like, have some medication. Like he's chaotic. Like he's extremely chaotic, but he always makes everything happen. Like even if he has to push back the time three, four, 5 times, he will make it happen. Whether it's today, tomorrow, next year, he will make it happen.
It
And I feel
is.
like I'm not
Sure.
appreciative of him enough because I feel like I'm like, oh, I want you because it's like he's like a father like sort of figure. So I'm like, I want to spend so much time with you, so much time with you, and all the time, every single minute of the day, I wanted to do that. But I'm like, and then I get a bit like, oh, I don't, you can't spend that much time with me. You can't call me. But I'm like, he makes it like he will spend like it's every Tuesdays right now. He will spend 5, 6 hours with me all in one go. We will talk about so many different things, and
Hmm.
I'm just like, it's even like ADHD. Even as a person with ADHD, I do find it difficult to understand people with ADHD because it's like people say it's a spectrum, but it's a weird spectrum, like a spectrum that is more like a pie chart. But like I don't know, but it's just like I feel like he's just chaotic. But I would have him any other way.
Yeah. So I mean,
But
the thing is,
you
the
would
thing
get that.
is, yeah, no, 100%. And it's also worth remembering, and that my ADHD and someone else's ADHD will look like completely different. We will have so much in common, but there will be so many differences as well. I mean, the one that is most relevant to me is most people I know with ADHD are horrific timekeepers, and I'm so anxious about timekeeping. I'm painfully early to most things, and and I don't understand how someone couldn't be. So that that's one example. But yeah, we get things done of it. Like it might be a mad roundabout way of doing it, but we do get things done, and it is a strength. Our ability to be able to work on the hoof and just go with it. I mean, you might have heard some of the theories about why ADHD exists in terms of like thousands of years ago. Who would be the person that would have like eaten that fruit or gone into that cave? Would probably be the person with ADHD, and that's how humanity actually moves forward. Because you go, right, well, we're not going to eat that fruit because he's just died. But he might have turned
Oh
around and said that was
no!
delicious. And oh, that's a papaya. Oh, brilliant. Well, we'll keep eating that then. And you know, I quite like that theory about neurodivergence. We've helped move humanity forward by our traits and our skills and things like that. I like that theory myself, but there you go.
Yeah, I've never heard of the theories. This is my first time. Wow.
Oh, really? You not heard that one? It's kind of this hunter gatherer one, like you know. Oh, let's rub these two sticks together and create fire. Like that's an ADHD thing to
No,
do. Let's
somebody's
jump
probably
off this and
stimming.
see what happens.
Stimming.
Oh, I've snapped both legs. Okay, that wasn't a great idea. Well, the next person isn't going to do it. So yeah, I like it.
How has your personal experiences with ADHD influenced your approach to policing? And what strategies have you found helpful in overcoming these challenges?
Oh, repeat the start of the question. Sorry, I've started thinking about something halfway through.
Okay. I did that whilst reading the question on the second half. How has your personal experience with
Mm.
ADHD influenced your approach to policing?
Mm.
And what strategies have you found helpful in overcoming these challenges?
Okie dokie. So I'm going to answer the second bit first because, I do my day job involves quite a lot of reading, quite a lot of material and that sort of thing. So I've learned to do chunking so I recognize that it's naive of me to think I can work solidly for like an hour. That's just silly. So it's easier for me to work for like 20 minutes, take a micro break of like a couple of minutes, stretch my legs. I'm going to be far more productive if I do that. And I think that's got a name. It's called the Pomodoro technique. You can actually get Pomodoro timers on like devices. Yeah. So you can get them on like I'm not going to mention the name of the device because there's one in this room and she'll start kicking off. But begins with an A and ends with an A. Yeah, called the Pomodoro technique. It's really it's like a known technique. It's not even necessarily for neurodiversity. Um, I've learned to try if I need to get an important piece of work to do, lock that in a different room. Like I will sometimes text my family and say, look, if you need me, call because this is going elsewhere. I'm not going to be looking at my phone because that is far more interesting than some of the boring stuff I've got to do. Um, then use of some of the software we have. So like, I use Microsoft OneNote prolifically. I make lots of like different to-do lists and things like that. Microsoft To Do is good because you can put reminders and timers on things. So, these are little management techniques. Blocking time, having chunks of time in my calendar set aside for work is useful, and I'm not always the best at that, but that's one thing I've learned to do. So it's all fairly dull stuff. And then also like the older I've got with my sort of diagnosis, the more I'm learning to sort of advocate for myself. So earlier on, when you asked that question and I asked you to repeat the start of it, I probably wouldn't have done that in the past because I felt too embarrassed to do so. But now I'm like, yeah, I've got ADHD. I got distracted. Like I got distracted internally. I wasn't looking at anything. I was thinking about the second part of the question and completely like the first bit. In the past, I probably wouldn't. I probably trying to blag it. Now I'm kind of like, this meeting's gone on too long, kids. I'm going for a walk. You should have considered my needs. So that takes a while to start doing that. But in terms of the first bit, I kind of already touched upon a few of these bits. I know how I communicate and what I get distracted by and what is challenge for me. So if I was to be meeting someone and dealing with them, I would have those considerations in mind. And fundamentally, the best way of doing that is to talk to people about what works and like say, look, tell me if you need to have a break. Tell me if you need to repeat a question. Tell me if you need to explain that in a slightly different way. So, there's probably more examples there. I guess as well, fundamentally, I see quite a lot of talk about neurodiversity on a lot of the reports and things I read, and it's sometimes, I wouldn't say necessarily negative, just misguided. So I read a lot of missing persons reports, and you will see people with ADHD. There's almost So sometimes people just go, oh, that's high risk. I'm like, is it? You've not asked any questions about that person's ADHD, whether they take medication, how often they take the medication, what happens if they don't take the medication. It's just like, again, it's awareness. So very convoluted, long answer to a quite a simple question, which is one of my skills.
I feel like, like this kind of links back to like finding a purpose. Like we talked about earlier about how the education, like, system has failed. Like, the person that needs to constantly walk around, they walk around to other tables and maybe start conversations or something like that. Like, oh, why didn't you hand out the books? Why don't you collect
Yeah,
the books and then um order them on who did the work?
that's an intelligent way of dealing with somebody's need to get up. I've heard horror stories from people at school who the children told, well, go and do a few laps of the field. Well, how's that inclusive? You've just taken them out the classroom environment and told them to go and do laps of like stuff
And
like
who's
that.
supervising them?
Where's your example? Makes far more sense. You're giving them a job, you're giving them a role. But I'd say one of the biggest challenges for me is I lived for 36 years of my life not realizing I had a condition and had needs. And one of the first things I was asked when I was diagnosed is, what reasonable adjustments would you like? And my answer was, I'm going to swear, I'm 30 fucking six. So you tell me what reasonable adjustments I should have. And that's the challenge for people. Because I'm now aware that I'm a square peg that's been trying to kick himself into a round hole my entire life. Now I've got a bit more awareness. I'm going to try and put myself in appropriate holes. That sounds dodgy, but you know what you know what I mean. Like that's what we're talking about.
Can you share like a specific example of a challenge you face as a detective with ADHD and how you navigate through it successfully?
Successfully might be a struggle, but I mentioned earlier on that policing has a lot of physical roles that give you dopamine. As a detective, where I got my rush is if we had someone in custody or there was a high risk offender and we had to go and get them. But once you get them and once you get, you do all of that sort of fun stuff on TV, like the interviews and all that sort of stuff that you did, associate with being a detective. You then have all of the paperwork. Everything slows down, and that's a challenge for me because there's no dopamine in sitting there writing out files and doing things. And that is apparent to me that that's always been a challenge. That was a challenge at university as well. And I guess you sort of said successfully is a struggle because I now understand why I have those challenges. First of all, I'm kinder to myself because I used to be, you're lazy, you're incompetent, you're a moron. Look at everyone else can do it and you can't. And that
Oh, the classic phrase.
And the self-esteem issues I'm going to probably have for the rest of my life because you don't have 36 years of conditioning yourself that you're worthless and you click your fingers and then realize you're not worthless. I'm better, but that I don't think that's ever going to completely go, that mindset. But it's yeah, so that's number one, sort of being kind to yourself. And number two, I giving your advocating for yourself. So if I've been told, look, you've got to do this piece of work, so, well, can I go and do it from a different part of the office then, where it's not so busy, or maybe work from home that day, and then I guess planning. So again, hide this fucker, like trying to move meetings, mute your emails, maybe that sort of thing, and then learning to things like I've sort of mentioned earlier on, chunking my time. And don't get me wrong, it's not always a success. There's sometimes I still will go off the rails and go off and do something else. But if you set yourself up to fail, you will fail. If you try and set yourself up to succeed, you won't always succeed, but you've probably got a better chance. Is probably the best way of putting it. Because I'm not always successful, because diagnosis and medication and awareness, it's not a complete golden bullet. I will always have struggles with my conditions. I know that fundamentally. I will never be cured of my ADHD. I'll never be cured of my dyspraxia. But it's about managing them in the best way possible. Another long answer to a short question.
It's okay. I was just, it's like, I feel like another thing is, I don't know, I was just thinking about when I was in a house with three people with ADHD,
Bloody
myself
hell.
included. Yeah. So I would be concentrating, I'll be working, we're all in three different rooms, right? This is like normal car. We're all in three different rooms. Somebody gets bored, they would come to the other two people with ADHD and try to annoy them or take their energy there. And then it's like craziness. The house is madness. Sometimes you're like you know the ADHD hyperfocus, and you're like it doesn't bother you, and then you whilst you're working, you're like ooh intrigued, ooh ooh I want a bit of that, ooh, and then you're
People are
like
the
oh, and
worst.
then you hear noises, and you're like oh I want to be involved. What is that? Ooh, and then you just it was
And this is
madness.
what I mean. Like, and this is like why some people will work better if they go and shut. Like, people are the worst. People are bloody interesting. Even if they're not interesting, they're more interesting than what you might be doing. And yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, but I know other people that talk about body doubling and that sort of accountability and stuff. I've never practiced any of that, but that sounds like quite a good idea. Yeah, it is still a challenge, and this is why I implore people to look into workplace coaching and that sort of thing. Because again, I was diagnosed at 36, so I've got all of these different strategies and things in place that I have developed, but some of them aren't very good. So that's what the coaching hopefully provides, and I have had some success with coaching, and I recommend it to people. There are things
Oh
out there
my,
to help.
I was just thinking if I was body doubling myself, I will be arguing with my body. I would literally move my body as if like two people and argue with the body.
Well, but I remember recently I saw, I think it was on Instagram, and it kind of pointed out the massive amount of dopamine you get from having an argument with someone, and then you kind of stop and have this realization and think to yourself, am I perpetuating this argument and continue this argument to get a nice kick of dopamine? And then that makes you feel like a terrible human being. But hey ho, it's an interesting theory, isn't it? I like.
No, oh my God, I do that. I start arguments and it doesn't even make sense. This person just walks. Oh my God, if this person would walk through into the door and I'd be like, "You are this, you stupid fuck, you are incompetent." What? And there's nothing. This person just walked in the door. I probably haven't seen this person in a week. And I'm like, I'm just gonna bring something up. I'd be like, why are you wearing those shoes? I don't know. But they should like, wait, can you get dopamine tablets?
That's the way to do it. Well, I mean, yeah, they're called stimulant medication. Or illegal hard drugs. Don't do those, kids. Go. But jokes aside,
Keep your job. Well done for saying that.
how many people are self-medicating them? Genuinely,
Yeah.
genuinely. Like I we talked about a lot of the criminal justice system stuff earlier on. Part of that is people are self-medicating with alcohol and drugs who
And I
don't
feel,
necessarily realize they are neurodivergent. I'm
and
telling
it's
you.
like people are like, well, I feel calmer. I feel like I'm able to think clearer. And you're like, and
I've never taken any illegal hard drugs. But if they had the same effect as what my Elvance, 60 milligrams of Elvance, which is a stimulant medication, has, I can understand why people would use them. I'm not suggesting they should, but it's the concept of self-medication, isn't it? And I would suggest a lot of people out there using hard drugs are self-medicated.
yeah, whether it's for, their neurodivergence or for their mental health.
Yeah, but a lot of people who would be doing that wouldn't know they are doing it because they're neurodivergent, because they don't know they're neurodivergent, because most neurodivergent people don't know they're neurodivergent. I think that's just a fact. So
Get a call when you're 39.
I
Ring,
mean,
ring, who's there?
well,
Neurodivergent.
I mean, ADHD, what was 20 years ago? The medical science still believed it was something you grew out of as a child. There's generations of people that were missed from diagnosis, and That's why you're
Yeah.
seeing so many people getting diagnosed now.
It's really like funny what you just said like a bit earlier. I just processed about your beliefs, like your self-esteem, difficulties and stuff like that. I was like, I've told one of my therapists. She's like, we're talking about schemas and the beliefs I have about myself, and I'll be like, yeah, I will challenge those schemas when I'm 28, 20, no, not 28, 29. Because if I had 14 years and 7 months of a shit life, that's before I came into care. Is it still shit? Yes, it is at 18. But that's a whole nother story. Um, what was I saying? Yeah, if I need another like a 15 years to for it to be like, okay, it's been 15 years. Like maybe I should.
I don't think you're ever too young to start learning practices about being kind to yourself. But the only reason I'm older and like I'd like to think if I'd been diagnosed younger, I would have been further along that journey of self-acceptance. I'd like to think that, but how do you start a journey of self-acceptance when you don't understand what the start point is? And I didn't
Yeah,
understand the start point until I was 36 when I got diagnosed. So I certainly would say to you and other young people listening, like there's no like it's never too early to start challenging your inner critic and and sort of these kind of techniques around self improving your self-worth and stuff is stuff that people should practice as soon as possible. uh it's easy for me to say that. I don't always practice my own advice. I'm terrible at it sometimes,
we
but
give it amazing advice. Following it. Mm.
oh god, yeah, like I give brilliant advice. I'm happy to admit that. It's ridiculous though, like the whole self-worth thing, because like there's almost like there's two brain versions of me. There's logical brain Daily, who's like, well, look, you're relatively successful in life. You've without sounding like I'm being arrogant, I've achieved everything I've ever wanted to achieve from a sort of family point of view and a house. I've got a relatively good career. I get paid relatively well for what I do. I get the opportunity to help people. So on that side of things, the logical side of things, it's great. This side of things, you're an idiot. You've not, you could have done so much more. Why did you cock that up? Like I've come away from doing I do a lot of presenting in my day job, and I come away from like doing presentations where I've had excellent, feedback, and I thought I was an absolute did a terrible job,
Yeah, I
absolutely
could have
terrible.
done this better. Well, I sounded like this. Did it? Yeah.
Or focusing on the little tiny mistakes you made rather than the overall impact of the entire thing, where everyone was like, "Oh, I really learned something today. Thank you very much. That was a really good, funny presentation," or whatever. But logic, logic brain versus negative thought brain, it's a challenge, and there have been times where this is winning. This is winning less now than this is winning more. And even if that one turns up, I can still sometimes bring that one across. But this one will still. I don't think I'm ever going to lose that because as I say, I can't. But that's what I'm saying. You're never too young to start challenging that.
Mm.
And it's hard to sit back and go, actually, what? Look at all the stuff I am doing, and often it's in spite of the tremendous challenges we face.
Mm.
We're achieving things that other people aren't achieving, and they don't have the hurdles that we have to deal with.
Yeah, that's true. I
We're
feel
brilliant.
I don't know if you're like this, but but do you ever feel like, oh my God, I'm not achieving what I should, I'm not in the place where I want to be. I'm not achieving as much as I could be.
I occasionally I'm getting better at that
Hmm.
now. I am, and it's hilarious that I have to quantify that I'm not sounding arrogant when I say some of these things, which is something I'm always going to have as well, because I spend my entire life apologizing. And even now, I'm like, oh, I hope I'm not being patronizing, like when I talk and things like that. I think I'm less bad at that, but the more I do in these different roles, I think fundamentally it's understanding we can always do more. you can always, always, always do more. It's just accepting that sometimes you are enough. What you're doing is enough. If you're there doing good things, you're doing more than people that choose not to do good. I
Like,
get it's a tough one.
compared to a terrorist, like you're doing amazing. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
oh my god, I
that's the
just
extreme end of the scale, but even fundamentally, like people who aren't like doing what you're doing podcasts and all this work, they're trying to help people. In spite of the struggles you have yourself, you're going out your way to try and make things better for other people. That is inherently good. Why are you and I incapable of sometimes understanding that? I can't answer that question, but that's
that was so. Oh my god, this reminded me of the time in my autism assessment when I was in on a break. He said we were on break. We weren't on a break. And I said, and we were looking at a map. She showed me the world map. She was like, "Oh, what do you think about America?" And I said, "Oh, I'd rather go to an active concentration camp than America." Yeah, I should. And it was on my report.
oh.
Oh, that
You weren't on a break, clearly outrageous. You were deceived, but that's your big yes. That was the thought is in your head, and that's what you said.
yeah. And I feel like I've just made another thing like that just earlier when I said the terrorist thing. I was like, "Oof,
No, not at all. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about that. It's like that's the extreme end of like people doing bad things. I'm just talking about like fundamental, yeah, quote unquote normal person. The fact that you are doing things to go above and beyond to help people puts you in a different place. Making vague amount of
yeah."
sense. Hope so.
I
Anyway.
I just like thought about the Instagram reel that I saw today. They were like, if you have a husband who has ADHD, just just give him children and let him deal with it.
Well, it's interesting because I have two children and I do enjoy spending time with them, but it's a challenge. And I do get to the point where, I do get to stop and I feel exhausted because it's that whole thing of doing things 100%. But it brings me, again, parent doing sort of work that I do other than my day job is a little bit like parenting. Parenting is one of the hardest things that anyone will ever do, but it's the most rewarding thing that anyone
Mm,
can ever do. And that's how I feel about the extra work I do around supporting staff welfare and neurodiverse people in the criminal justice system. It's hard work, but it's incredibly rewarding. So that's why we do it, I guess. I don't do things from a selfish point of view, but I get a tremendous amount out of doing it. So
mm,
there is a degree of that, I guess. I
yeah.
I get off on helping people and trying to make things better. So I
I
think,
feel like the injustices or like struggles that we go through, it just fuels as like passion
you know,
to
ADHD in particular comes with a massive dose of justice sensitivity and that side of things, which is probably why you know a lot of people do gravitate towards law enforcement because hey, justice sensitivity. But yeah, no, I think we see things that are wrong and we want to change them, and then I think that's again that's a good thing. It's a bad thing if you do it to the point of your own detriment, and that's the challenge, trying to find that balance we sort of said earlier on between doing everything and healthy, which is not always easy.
In your opinion, what are some misconceptions or stereotypes about ADHD that you've encountered in the policing field, and how do you address them?
Oh, so I mean, well, okay. So Daily confesses here. I remember being in uniform and going to people's houses and meeting children who were misbehaving, and the parents would say, "Oh, they have ADHD," and I genuinely believe that was an excuse for their behaviour. Now I'm educated now, so I know that's not necessary. And I'm not saying neurodivergent conditions are an excuse for bad behaviour, but it's mitigating. It's a mitigating circumstance of that. And so I now have that understanding. Then you kind of get, I say, the three obvious ones are people with ADHD are hyperactive. Well, yes, but it's not just physical hyperactivity, it's mental hyperactivity. People don't understand that. I mean, the name itself is problematic. Attention deficit. Well, sometimes it's not a deficit. I've got far too much attention, but it's just on the wrong thing. So that in itself is a misconception, not helped by the silly name. I guess without sounding boring and repeating an answer, the answer to those is education. You educate people as to what the condition actually looks like. And I do a lot of awareness presentations in my own time and at work to try and help people understand ADHD and other neurodivergent conditions just a little bit better and try and challenge some of those stigmas that we face. I guess one of the biggest ones you see in society at the moment, and it's not helped by certain news outlets perpetuating it, is this notion that ADHD is like a trend and like everyone's got it, and that whole thing where and I know no one would go out their way to have these challenges. As much as I love my ADHD and I love the fact it's part of me, I wouldn't choose to have some of the challenges I've had. I wouldn't go out my way, and I didn't come to that realization lightly. It took a long time for me to. I was first told I had ADHD back in 2014. I didn't get diagnosed until 2021. It's a long time to get to that point where I felt able to go and get diagnosed and start asking for help. So no one, and this notion that anyone would choose it because it's a fad and it's a trend, like fuck off. Like no one would do that. So yeah, and again,
Like there's like, the traits. Like what annoys me is when people are like, well, everybody has ADHD, everybody has autism. And I'm like, that annoys me because I'm like, no, there's like these traits. Like you can have these traits, but doesn't mean everybody has autism or everybody has ADHD, but it's just at different severity. That really frustrates me. I'm like,
I use quite a terrible analogy sometimes. It's like I have a bottle of vodka and I'm making myself a cocktail. If I pour a small amount of vodka into the glass and then make my cocktail, then yeah, I've got that small amount of vodka. Me with my ADHD, I'm drinking from the bottle neat. That's the difference. Yeah, whoop-de-doo, you sometimes forget things and sometimes you can be a bit late. I got all that, baby. I got all of it neat. It's that's it. Yeah, I when I present, I literally say what you've just said. Like we all have traits. Everyone. Neurodiversity is a word in the way because we're all neurodiverse. All of us are. It's whether those traits mount up enough to get to the point of a diagnostic threshold where it is a challenge in all aspects of your life. And that's the point. All aspects, at home, at school, at work. Not, oh, I forget my keys occasionally. Yeah, well, in and it's not defending those people. I think a lot of people say that stuff because they're trying to be empathetic. They don't realize how misguided it is. The other one, I bet
and it feels a
you.
bit like a stab. Be
Sorry?
like, well, it's like diminishing the challenges that we
Oh,
have to go
absolutely.
through.
Absolutely. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I try not to bite those people's heads off. I'd rather sort of say, look, no, I get where you're coming from, and yeah, we've all got traits, but do not try and compare your occasional forgetfulness to what me and I don't consider my conditions as severe as some people. I think people have their ADHD and dyspraxia far more severely than I do. I'm not saying I don't have challenges. I have a tremendous amount of challenges. But yeah, you are immediately diminishing me. I mean, the other one, and I'm sure you've heard it. You don't look like you don't look autistic to me. What?
Ah,
What? You show me this you show me this autistic person that like this stereotypical. What is that? Yeah, and I guess you've got how autism was portrayed in certain films, like Rain Man's always the one, isn't it? Oh, I bet you can do like incredible sort of card number tricks and stuff like that. No, that's a very niche part of certain part of autism that, you know, might affect, like might be a few, very few select group of people. That's not what this condition looks like at all. From like, yeah, it's
You know, like when people, but the thing is, another like people think, you know, ADHD, autism, that's what dyspraxia, dyslexia is like, you know, like one side of neurodivergence. They don't think about OCD or epilepsy. Let's just use epilepsy. That's a very physical condition, and and it is a spectrum condition. And nobody's like, oh my God, we're all a bit epileptic.
even as you say it, it's just laughable, isn't it? It's
I
it
tried
just
to say it
because
with a straight face, I couldn't.
it's hard to, isn't it? But because it is laughable. But again, you would not use this kind of language to visible disabilities. Like, we're not all a bit, you know, I can't think of even a word that you'd say. Like, we're
We're
not
not
all a
all a
bit.
bit cancerous. Sorry, just like
Yeah, well, you're not. Yeah, yeah. It is insane. It is literally insane. But there you go.
right.
And again, what is the answer? The answer is education. The answer
Mm.
is education in all forms of society and representation as well. And that's why I'm willing. I will talk about my conditions. I want people, and I want people to ask me about my conditions. I want to be able to tell people this is what neurodiversity is. This is what my neurodivergence looks like. Because fundamentally, all it is my brain processes information differently. In its most base form, then, as you rightly say, again, I'm not trying to diminish it because I've been medicated for anxiety for years before I got the ADHD. And I know most people come to our support group, anxiety, depression, OCD, bipolar, oppositional defiant, I can never remember what that was called. All of
Opposition
these
defiance
things that,
disorder.
thank you very much. All these things that people were diagnosed with before they got anywhere near the ADHD. And I'm like, there you go. Yeah, I can't remember what I was saying now, but there you go.
Is
And yeah,
overlaps.
of course it does. Of course it does.
It's like when
Yeah,
they say, like you know, when you see those Venn diagrams of like autism and ADHD, that's the most common one, and then it's autism, ADHD, and OCD.
I guess there's this, I see where you're going, and there's this perception that I've got like my ADHD bag and my dyspraxic bag. I carry those two things around. I'm like, in reality, the two bags are fucking mashed together, and there's a big bit of autism in there, and there's a bit of dyscalculia as well, and it's all jumbled up and going on. And I think as well, that people don't understand is that I can mask a tremendously large amount of my traits for years, and then something will change in a person's life, and then all comes spilling out, or those traits become a challenge when our circumstances change. People don't fundamentally understand that. It's like, I've got it in a nice little cup. Trust me, mate, I do not have it in a cup at all. It's not neat. It's not tidy. It's messy. It's
Mm.
yeah.
The one thing, oh shit, I forgot what I was gonna say. What were we talking about?
See what happens when you get two neurodiverse people together, man. It's a beautiful thing. I'll shut up for a second.
I don't think it's gonna help your face.
It'll pop up. It will magically turn up in your head. I guarantee it. You'll be halfway through something else and be like, oh, there it is.
Yeah. Well, I don't I oh, did you know? I've learnt this because I thought um my I thought we all like a few of us thought I could have dyslexia. And do you know that trauma, autism, and ADHD creates a dyslexic-like response?
Oh, I did not know that.
Overlaps.
Oh,
There's the link.
yeah. I I mean, I do understand how trauma can amplify neurodivergent traits.
Mm.
I know some people that say, like, isn't there like quite a prominent person on ADHD sort of tried to suggest that trauma causes ADHD. I'm like, no,
No,
no.
it
I was born,
amplifies.
yeah, I was born with this shit, man. And there are times in my life where it's more, and other times where it's just, yeah.
It's like the one thing that I'm like, I feel like in both our like jobs, like I guess like I don't have a day job, but like like the stuff that I do with the local authority, like my experience, there's a lot of presenting involved, a
Mm.
bit of sharing about experiences, and I feel in my head, I was in one of the trainings, and I thought, oh my God, I presented very much with autism when I'm presenting. I'm stimming, I'm looking around, I'm pacing. And everybody's like, no, when you're focused and when you're doing something, you, you're like autistic traits, like self-simulation behavior, stuff like that does not come out. And it's like you think you are like, it's so obvious, but it really isn't
Yes.
sometimes.
So when you're presenting, you're talking about a subject you A, know, and B, you're passionate about. You're in your element, so you kind of even yeah. I mean, you're going with it, I guess. I present a lot. I present for my day job, and I do a lot of presenting around my ADHD stuff. And I always think it's really, really obvious. And I always make a joke about if I'm stood somewhere like on a stage or something, like this is like a dyspraxic danger zone. I did it today. I was presenting and there was a cable that ran literally around the back of where I was stood. And I was like, I'm not going to go anywhere that effing cable because I will trip over that cable 100%. But maybe it's far less obvious than I think it is. But in my head, it's if I'm
It's
there
front and
presenting,
center.
like, yeah, here I am, I've got ADHD and dyspraxia. And I imagine most people wouldn't know unless I said something.
Mm. And I feel like people with like neurodivergence can spot other people with
Oh,
neurodivergence.
yeah,
Yeah. I was
like
like,
Christ, it's really apparent now, and you the downfall and danger of that is over. Like I can go and diagnose people. It's like no, you can't. And and I see people get into trouble like suggesting it to people. You're like, there's a time and a place, guys. That it's don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not possible. You've got to be really careful about that. It's yeah. I
yeah.
interrupt you. Sorry.
Like I know a few people who go around throwing diagnosis, and I'm just like, when it's also like in that house I said with ADHD, I was the only person with autism there, and I was like, no, they don't have autism. They're like, oh, they're autistic, and I'm like, no, no, no. I'm like, it's like I feel like you become really like protective because you know how challenging it can be, and just throwing out because of like you said, the occasional forgetfulness or yeah. Have you found any specific accommodations or support systems within policing that have been beneficial for you as a detective with ADHD?
So we do so within work that I do get workplace adjustments and that side of things. The challenge, and this is true of policing, but it's true of other workplaces as well, is this gap between being diagnosed, between having a condition and getting diagnosed. And as we know, there is a massive waiting list on NHS for diagnosis for ADHD and for autism. But what do we do for the people that have these challenges that don't have the diagnosis piece of paper?
Mm.
And what we need is qualified workplace assessors that can go, right, I can't diagnose you, but what's your job? What do you struggle with? These are things that we can put in place to help you. And that's the challenge. So I do have workplace adjustments. I went for access to work to get help. I mentioned coaching earlier on. So these are things that do help me. So I've got a decent pair of noise cancelling headphones. I've got some bits of assistive kit. So those sort of things do exist for me. I guess one of the challenges that people don't know what you can ask for and what adjustments and things are out there. And I mentioned it earlier on. What reasonable adjustments do you like, mate? How am I supposed to know? I've just been
Oh,
diagnosed. I've never, literally, you've told me I've got this thing. I haven't got a clue. Your occupational health. You tell me, and that's the challenge. That's a real challenge. And I would say it's also true of people coming into contact with police, because people might not realise that they can. I'm not saying you'll always get an appropriate adult if you ask, but you can say I really could do with an appropriate adult. I could, or that kind of stuff. And I don't think people would necessarily know that you can do those sort of things.
Mm.
And, I wrote a piece of guidance which is free. People can look it up. It's online. It's called ADHD in Custody. And me and the group of people I wrote it with, wrote it as a guide for people who are coming into police stations who may or may not know they've got ADHD, can pick out reading, identify some of the traits and go, oh, hang on a minute, I have these struggles. I can advocate and I can say, please, can I have an appropriate adult for the interview or a bit of help here? And that's I think there's a lot of help out there. It's just that people don't necessarily know how to go about getting it.
I have a question. We'll come back to the guide, in detail a bit later on.
Yeah.
We went off the questions, but you know what? It's fine. It's insightful. It's real. It's whatever. Anyway, um, oh yeah. So basically, into these, when you go to the police station, they ask you, "Oh, do you have any medical condition? Do you take medications that is or whatever?" And what they've told when you tell them, and then it has to go through a check with the nurse.
Yeah. So
So,
so
sorry,
well, I'll try and explain it as best I can. And tell me if I've answered your question. When
I haven't answered
people
the
are,
question yet.
oh, go on then.
Sorry,
All right.
feel bad. Sorry. Um, it and and because they say people, because the custody sergeant explained to me that they do this because some people lie to get accommodations and stuff made for them, or to excuse what they did, or use that. Um, However, if you don't have a diagnosis on paper that they can check, can you still request for an appropriate adult?
Really good question. Yes, you can. However, in custody, the custody sergeant is basically the king of the castle, and that the custody sergeant exists to basically make sure that you are looked after during your time in the police station. But I guess the majority of their looked after is your physical health, and they're less good. And again, this comes with that point I made earlier on about training, understanding someone's needs, because and I know what the Equalities Act of 2010 says, and what it quite clearly says is you do not need a diagnosis to get reasonable adjustments. So by all means, a person can ask, and if you're able to eloquently explain why you would need an appropriate adult, you might get one. But it's not like I ask for appropriate adult or I get an appropriate adult. That's not how it works, unfortunately. It is kind of assessed. But that assessment, I would suggest, is based on the knowledge of that sergeant, which is a real mixed bag because of the lack of training. So it's a really difficult one. And that's why, I won't go on to it again, but so it's a really difficult question to answer. But I would encourage people, if you believe you need help, to ask. If you can eloquently explain. And let's just say they said no. And then down the line, let's just say the case went further and it'd be on record that you asked and you weren't given it. I'd argue that's a serious mitigating circumstance in your case. You asked for something, you asked for an adjustment and you were not given it. How has that negatively impacted you on your stay in police custody?
I have a question. So, if someone is there certain, for example, neurodivergence or no, learning difficulties or something like that, that will guarantee you getting an appropriate adult? Or is it still upon the assessment of the custody sergeant?
It's the assessment of the custody sergeant with potentially the help from a nurse or a doctor within custody, I'd suggest.
Hmm.
It's
Have
it,
you ever
go on.
worked, sorry, have you ever worked with someone like, like you're doing a police interview or, and you thought that they would need an appropriate adult?
Yes, 100%.
So how would you assess that?
Me personally, if I'm asking questions in an interview, do I feel that question has been understood? And I can judge that by their answer, their lack of answer, or the distress and confusion I can see on their face. And I guess a lot of that comes down to experience. And I would point out that a lot of the interviewing I did in my career was prior to being diagnosed myself. So before I had that level of awareness. Because my job is to get evidence, but actually, no, that's not my job at all. My job is to it's to get evidence. It's when I go out getting evidence, I am not trying to prove someone's guilty. That's not my job. I am not trying to make the facts fit. My job is to dispassionately collect all of the evidence available. So my job in the interview, when I'm interviewing someone, is for them to give me the clearest and fairest account possible for them. And if I don't feel they're capable of understanding my questions or eloquently answering them, then that's not fair. That's not fair on them. So it's my job to stop that and get them the help they need. Now, I'm not saying they won't be interviewed, but if I felt in the past that someone's not able to, and I say defend themselves, not like I'm attacking them, but able to give them a clear account, give the best account available to them. Terrible English. Yeah, it's my job to try and help them. I think I've explained that.
Yeah, you explained that beautifully.
Right.
So I'm just thinking, when people when people have meet a certain thresholds of needs or higher, why would that person not be brought into police custody?
Are you talking about like the person not being arrested?
Yes, they will get like unarrested or whatever. Like, for example, a person can get arrested and then you'd be like, oh, this person, they have additional needs, there's
I
other
guess,
circumstances.
I guess fundamentally, it's the balancing act between the reason people are arrested is not as a punishment; it's to get evidence. So I can interview somebody without arresting them. It's called a caution plus free interview. I can invite someone in. I can say an allegation's been made. Would you come in and answer questions? It's the same process, except I'm not depriving them of their liberty. It's literally the same. They're cautioned. They have the right to legal representation. They have the right to an appropriate adult as well, funnily enough. It's exactly the same process. So people are arrested to gain evidence, and that evidence might be forensic, fingerprints. It might be there's a question of identification. It might be that person's a flight risk. It might be that person's dangerous, and the intention is to interview them and then remand them for custody. So the balancing act between whether you want someone to come into a police custody is evidential value versus risk to them. And if they had like a severe mental health condition, or let's just say they were basically unable to answer questions even with the help of an appropriate adult, then you're kind of going that way on the evidence there and their needs there. I've interviewed people in mental health units because that was the best place to do it. I took a mobile kit to a mental health unit and interviewed the person there because it would not have been appropriate to take that person out of the mental health unit because it wouldn't have been good for their health and it wouldn't have been good potentially for anyone that we might have encountered within police custody. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, answered it perfectly. What advice would you give to other individuals with ADHD who are pursuing a career in law enforcement or a similar field?
First of all, I kind of touched upon earlier on, it's quite a good job. I think it is a good job for that. I would encourage people to be, if you've got your diagnosis, to be honest and upfront as soon as possible. And if you need adjustments and help, to ask for it. Because again, we are talking about organizations that might not have a good amount of neurodivergence awareness, neurodiversity awareness. So you might have to tell them what adjustments you need. You might have to tell them what works for you. So be honest and upfront about it. If you know that you have certain skills, so if you know, or weaknesses, try and ask for help, because there's help out there, reasonable adjustments and safety software and that sort of stuff. But also maybe consider what career within policing would best suit you. So if you know that maybe, building a big case file and taking something to court with all of that entails might not be for you because the fear of all the paperwork. Or maybe like more response-based policing is for you, like blatting about in police cars. So don't get me wrong, you still have to do paperwork and statements and things, but you won't be having to be responsible for putting together or being organized with like a big case file and managing several cases at once and that side of things. So, have a little think about how you could sort of, go for those kind of roles, because there is something for everyone within policing. And I mean all neurodivergencies. It's just tailoring if you're a round peg, it's trying to find the round hole rather than the round peg because I'm a round peg that's been trying to put himself in a square hole my entire career, and I'm only now having that realization. So yeah, I think that's a good answer. Definitely advocate for yourself. Explain that you're taking medication. Explain how that might affect you. That kind of thing. Yeah. And join your support groups and associations. We're here to help you. We want to help you. We're like my group is a national support group. So if someone's listening to this and you live in bloody Scotland, you can still join our support group. We're national. We want to help people. We've written guides on how to get diagnosed and guides on how to get reasonable adjustments and all this kind of stuff. So there are people out there who care as well.
This is like a really strange question because it's another question I'm thinking off the top of my head. So like for example, somebody with autism, let's just say somebody with autism, and they struggle with like loud noises. How would how would that work in a policing role?
It's a really difficult question to ask, because my role running a staff support group is to put reasonable adjustments in place and try and help people as much as possible. But I always have to caveat the fact that we are talking about operational policing. And if you have a trait or something that stops you from doing a fundamental part of that job, then that's an issue. So there are ways that people can try and lessen those, trying to help around those things. But if fundamentally you like really loud noises affected you and you are putting yourself in a role where there's frequently really loud noises, it sounds hard, but you've got to kind of ask yourself, is that the role for you? You could still work for the police, because it's easy to forget, the police have a load of civilians working for us as well. So there are roles that you could still work within policing that might not have all the loud noises. I know it's a very specific example, but it's if you're going for a role where you know that is a possibility and then it becomes a reality, it's a difficult one to really. Don't be wrong, like, if it becomes apparent whilst you're in the job, you can point that out, you can get your diagnosis, you can go to occupational health and recommendations can be made, and they might be able to find a role for you, and hopefully they will, but it's not always possible. So it's a difficult one, because I don't want to sound like a dick and be like, no, you're going to lump it. but equally there is an element of that, I guess. I hope I've explained that without sounding too hard.
It's okay.
Cool.
Because that was one of our listeners' question. I'm sure they will understand. Um, how
Yeah.
d how do you balance the demands of your role as a detective, which requires, like attention to detail and focus, and the potential challenges that ADHD can present? I know those were very specific examples, but I don't know.
Well, no, and it's a really, really good question. It's hard, fundamentally, and I hate to go over old ground. Learning about your neurodivergence and what works for you and what doesn't work for you is fundamental
Mm,
in managing it. So I now know that those longer pieces of work are a challenge. So I now either try and put myself in a role where I'm not doing that, or put strategies in place to help me with those longer pieces of work or that require concentration. So the concentration thing and reading long, boring documents, I have a piece of software that reads documents to me. Bonza. When I'm doing a long piece of work, I know that I am able to say, look, if you require me to do this and you've got a deadline for it, could I not work from home that day? Or when I do that working from home, there's some of those strategies I mentioned earlier on, like chunking and that kind of stuff, and Pomodoro technique and taking breaks and that sort of thing. So there's no challenge that's insurmountable. It's just identifying what you're good at, what you're not good at, and then working with the good and helping the bad, if that makes sense.
Have you noticed any improvements in the way ADHD is understood and accommodated within the policing field over the course of your career?
Yes, that's only big headed, largely because we exist to tell people. So we encourage managers to come to us before because we see a lot of people who are put on like management action plans around their performance prior to any recognition of their neurodiverse challenges, which is bad because you can't expect someone to do something without giving them adjustments. And we encourage managers and people who come to us and we can go, oh, by the way, you do realize you could do this, and this comes to that education piece again, because often they don't know, the managers or the people. So the more people getting diagnosed, the more people speaking about their struggles and things, the more awareness there is, and the more awareness there is, the less challenges there are going to be, because we're educating people. I like to think that as we have been talking here, if you listen to this and didn't know about neurodivergence, you'd come away knowing a little bit more, because not big-headed, we've been talking about a lot of the aspects of it. So that's kind of the whole point. So I believe policing is getting there. It's just I wish it would get there a bit quicker.
Mm. It's one of those slowly but surely sort of things.
Well, I can give you an example. They might have paid quite a large sum of money for a private company to come in and do neurodiversity awareness training. It's not mandatory. So great. You've got a company to come in, and I know the company as well. They're really good people. But it's not great if it's not everyone, because a lot of the people that sign up for it are people like me. And I don't need the training. I just find it interesting. And that's a challenge.
And now we're going to link back from one of the first things that you mentioned when we had our induction session was your um guide for people with ADHD in custody.
Yes. So as I say, that came about because one of the people who I've sort of spoken to about ADHD quite a lot is Dr. James Brown, who does the ADHD adult podcast and stuff. You might have seen it. He does a lot of talks, and he went and did a talk, and then someone approached him afterwards and asked of that specific question. I was arrested. I got ADHD. I identified ADHD, and I asked for help, and I wasn't given it. And it got me thinking. Well, hang on a minute. That's very bad. So I contacted some people I know who work within law who are neurodivergent, and sort of asked that question. I'd already written some of the points that I believed would be relevant information. And understanding they came back with a lot more, and we just thought, well, sod it. And we wrote a literal booklet called ADHD in Custody. And people can go away and you can go and find it online. Our goal is for it to be a free resource that's available in all police stations. It's just making police forces kind of understand and take it up. And we've had interest, but no one kind of yet kind of implemented it. So, it's important to us that people are able to advocate for themselves and have a bit of education. We don't. I would hate to see a miscarriage of justice because someone didn't get the help they required, fundamentally.
Mm. And I feel like when people I don't know, I can't remember a specific name, but like there's been like so many examples of when people with additional needs, when they have not been given the resources that they need need, they end up in the criminal justice system even when they haven't done anything. Or it's like that really famous guy who's smiling and he has a really like a toy train, and his cognitive ability was the same as a 5-year-old. And they just wanted, it was a big murder case. They wanted somebody, this is like years ago, but they wanted somebody to blame, and they were like, okay, this guy will do it. There's a lot of pressure from higher up personnels, so let's just blame him. He can't defend himself, so just what.
Yeah. I mean, I think you see a lot more miscarriage of justice of that ilk in America, because in America, you don't necessarily, by the time you get around to court, get decent legal support if you don't have money, which in this country is slightly different. In criminal cases, you will get decent legal support. You get barrister support, to defend your case. So that's good. But the criminal justice system, like many other aspects of society, is not equipped to support neurodivergent people.
Hmm.
And that's a challenge, and that's where people have the pitfalls. But then we don't screen anyone. A lot of police forces won't even ask someone if they have a neurodivergent condition. So you might be asked if you're disabled, you might be asked if you take medication, but you can understand how someone with our conditions might fall through those gaps because we might not consider ourselves to be disabled. And then you look at the statistics about the amount of people in prison who have ADHD. Like the official figure that's always banded around is 25%. And that's considered a low estimate. Why are we not screening people if they come into police stations, making do ADHD screening questionnaires? And we can talk about the other neurodivergent conditions as well, but identify these additional needs, the earliest available opportunity. If we identify them, you'd like to think that a compassionate government and a compassionate society would then allow those people to get diagnosed and help as quick as possible. Because I've met people who've lived a life of crime up until the point they were diagnosed and medicated, and then they were able to get on the straight and narrow. And I think fundamentally that would happen if we just, as a society, did more to help people at the earliest available. We talked about education earlier on, but even beyond that, first of time we see them in police stations, giving them that help and support. I also don't think prison is a good place for people in general. I don't think
Let alone.
anyone. It's not set up to help people.
Mm.
It's not. If we cared about changing people's lives, all of the money we spent on keeping them locked up, we would spend in rehabilitating themselves from drinking drugs, educating themselves, giving them an education they never received, giving them a vocation, allowing them to be the person they could have been if they hadn't been dealt the socio-economic card of shit that they were. Because I fundamentally believe most people are not born evil, and they're just not given the opportunities that privileged people like me are given. I consider myself incredibly privileged. That's not a boast. That's just a fact. I'm a white British man. I'm probably like the top 2% of people on planet Earth in terms of privilege. And I think a lot of people that fall into the criminal justice system do so because they've lost the socioeconomic lottery. Very, very convoluted answer there, but there you go.
Okay. Can you share some key insights or strategies from the guide that can help individuals with ADHD navigate the challenges of being in custody?
Yeah. So like it, knowing that you can ask for an appropriate adult is massively important. That will massively help people in interview. The guide also literally talks about some of the key traits of ADHD because we fundamentally understand that a lot of people won't realise they have the condition because I talked about some of their problems earlier on with it being identified, certainly for people of a certain generation. So if you're sitting there going, hang on a minute, I am identifying all these points, they might start thinking, the help they can get whilst in custody, but then beyond that, getting diagnosed and that kind of help. And fundamentally, if you are getting diagnosed and have a condition, it should be taken into mitigation if the case got to court. It's just having a legal representative that understands that. So that's part of the point as well. It also very much quite clearly explains what your general rights are, so the free and independent legal advice, and the fact that you can consult the codes of practice and things like that. These are fundamental things that, whilst they are explained, they might not always be explained in a neurodivergent friendly way. Where the guide makes it quite clear, I guess. Yeah, so the fundamental points. Yeah.
So so what are some common misconceptions or misunderstandings surrounding ADHD in custody, and how does the guide aim to dispel them?
Um, Good question. Well, one of the common misconceptions I think, is lack of knowledge around people coming into custody, is not understanding that people with ADHD might require medication and things like that, and people don't necessarily understand that, and then no one bothers to ask the question, what happens if that person doesn't have their medication, and when should they be receiving their medication? Because I know, as well as you know, that if I didn't have my medication, I wouldn't be in the best place to be answering questions and be in that high stress situation. So I fundamentally think that that's one of the points it makes, and yeah, it also kind of makes some sort of points about sort of some of the adjustments that we can have, like the fact that we can have breaks, the fact that you can ask for a break. If you're being interviewed and you got to a point where you would like a break, you can ask for a break. Can I have a glass of water? Can I step out the room? Can we stop for a second? The person might roll their eyes and be annoyed, but you fundamentally are able to do that. It's your interview. And it's making some of these points because people don't. There's a massive power imbalance when someone's arrested, isn't there? Like and I think, even though I believe the police custody, the office, they do explain some of the key rights and entitlements people have. They might not necessarily explain some of the little points I've made, that you are able to say, I would like a break, I'd like an appropriate adult, please, I would like you to repeat that question. These are the sort of reasonable adjustments that we would like to see within workplaces. Fundamentally, if you think about those and twist them around, we can ask for them within police custody. Now, they might always be granted, but we can certainly ask for them, and it will go anything you request will be recorded, either audio and camera, because all police custodies are, or literally written on the custody record, because anyone that's arrested will have a big old custody record that everything is written down on, like a log. So if you make a request and it's denied, it should be going on that log. Little things like that, I guess. Yeah.
How does the guide address the specific challenges faced by individuals with ADHD in terms of communication, decision making, and impulse control within custodial setting?
Excellent question. Again, it does talk about a lot of the sort of adjustments that can be put in place to assist you with communication. So and that side of things. And it does explain a lot of those key traits, that the impulsivity and things like that. Because I say a lot of people who are going to be coming into police custody may well be screaming ADHD, but not necessarily have realized, had that moment where someone told them. So it does explain a lot of these kind of key traits. And if you're looking at that thinking, hang on a minute, I'm getting arrested potentially time and time again for the same sort of things, and it is involving these traits, then helping you identify that and understand that you have extra needs, and you can then advocate for yourself to get extra help. Yes, I think I've explained that vaguely eloquently.
What resources or support networks does the guide recommend for individuals with ADHD who are in custody or transitioning back into the community?
That's a very good question. I'm trying to remember if we do recommend certain things or not. It's been a little while since I've gone through it. So, it's a fair question. We don't actually really explain what sort of help you can get beyond the PlayStation environment. To be honest with you, it's more about the sort of things that we can sort of ask for whilst we're there, and that kind of thing. If I'm brutally honest. So yeah, no, it's a fair point. So maybe cut that one out.
Yeah, we'll cut that question out, don't worry. Um,
That's a good point though.
Thank you. How can the guide help educate custodial staff and other professionals about the unique needs and accommodations required for individuals with ADHD?
So fundamentally, the guide is actually sort of designed for people coming into custody. But if anyone was to pick this up, it literally does explain what what is ADHD, and goes through like the key sort of traits and what the common challenges are and things like that. So it's almost like a little to-do guide of like, this is ADHD, these are the challenges, this is what it presents like. It also has some of the statistics about ADHD in the criminal justice system and things like that. So obviously I'm quite clearly biased because I helped write it, but it literally explains things like, people with ADHD might be more likely to confess to things they didn't do, go along with what other people sort of say, so don't know in interviews, and if I read this as someone who's about to interview someone, and I didn't have any knowledge of ADHD, I'd be like, oh my goodness, there's so many things I could do. Because we even talk about at the back, we talk about who can be appropriate adult, who can't be, because obviously sometimes we have to say no to certain people being appropriate adults. Normally, if they're completely not appropriate or underage or something, or maybe involved in the case. But like just some of the kind of things that you can sort of ask for. And so if I was about to interview someone reading this, I was like, oh right, I could be putting in little breaks to help their focus, and those kind of things sort of break it up, or maybe even things like, if I know I've got someone who's potentially got ADHD, do I want them to be sat in that cell for 4 hours with no stimulation whatsoever? Give them a book, give them a fidget spinner, that kind of thing, because these are things we can technically do.
So, it just went. How does the guide address the intersectionality of ADHD with other identities and experiences, such as other neurodivergence, race, gender, and socioeconomic status?
Again, very, very, very fair point. It's interesting because we actually went and presented to the Appropriate Adult Network. We've got a brilliant name, the National Appropriate Adult Network, NARN, and we did talk about the issues around intersectionality, and the fact that a lot of the diagnostic criteria and things like that are designed for white boys like me, and things like that. Not necessarily really explaining them in the actual guide themselves, which is, yeah, I suppose a potential issue. Yeah, no, if I'm brutally honest, we don't really cover that.
Okay, we'll cut that question out.
So, in
Tell
fairness,
me,
Rosie, you did send me all these questions in advance, so forgive me. I clearly must have done an ADHD and read through like 2/3 of it and gone.
you did say that you were tired, but you
"Oh,
look through them. It's fine. You can cut these questions out anyway.
cool.
Let me know. I'm gonna read the next question. If you can just be like skip if you don't want to answer them.
Yeah, all good.
What steps can individuals, families, and communities take to ensure that the guide recommendations are implemented and supported within custodial settings?
I think fundamentally, it's something we are trying to get police stations to have this guide available. So if you are somebody who has gone through a custody sort of setting and don't feel your needs were met, knowing that this guide's available, like it's difficult, but we can write to our MPs, we can write to our police forces and say, look, if I'd had this guide available, I would have been in a far better position to advocate for myself, and I might not have had this terrible experience that I had. Because people, I think there's a lot of people out there having terrible experiences of custody, that's the whole purpose of the guide. So I guess that is one thing people can sort of do to try and raise the awareness. Speak to police forces, speak to MPs, and that
Did
kind
you
of
say
thing.
police horses?
Yeah,
Did you actually?
yeah. We're trying to get it into police forces.
Oh, forces. Oh, I heard horses.
Oh yeah, no, police horses. Yeah, we've not done a guide for them yet. Um, no, I mean I might have rolled my F slightly.
Uh, I uh, like, wouldn't you be like, oh my God, I've achieved everything in my life. I want nothing more. You see a police horse with your like
Maybe like
the big
you can
fuck
get
you to the police forces that would say no or whatever the reason may be.
well like a well-being dog, like a well-being horse. It would be slightly inappropriate, I guess, given its size, but maybe like a little Shetland pony or something like that.
What challenges did you encounter while co-authoring the guide, and how did you overcome them to create a comprehensive resource?
Very good question. I guess we wanted to make sure that what we were saying was legally sound because this is what's quite interesting about, I guess, kind of me, a lot of the advocacy and stuff and the work I've done to educate people. I've not received any training. This is all either lived experiences as a person with ADHD or lived experience as a person who's a police officer. So I think everything that went into the original guide was sound, but we were very, very diligent making sure that it was reviewed, and it was reviewed by barristers and a QC and by people who are far more legally sound than me. So it was a challenge, but it was worth it because we wouldn't want to put something up there that wasn't that had loopholes. It was very, very, very clear. I guess the biggest challenge we face is just getting police forces and to kind of get why it's relevant, and that's been, as I sort of said a few times already, the challenge around awareness and that side of things and training to make them understand why these things are necessary, to make them care, I guess.
Mm. Um, this part, the editor will cut out, but I've actually got a few people that are willing to talk about putting them in the custody, like the police stations,
Oh, wonderful.
um, in London. In They want to talk about it sometime in the new year. I haven't got any dates or anything like that.
Well, set up an intro email with me, and what I'll do is, if you would have introduced them to me, I would, because the girls who I wrote this with, are called Danielle, who is ADHD and autism, and another girl called Emma who's ADHD, but they've worked in the sort of more law background.
Mm.
They've set up their own sort of company. What's a company? It's like between a charity and a company called
An
Neurodivergent.
organisation?
Yeah, an organisation called Neurodiversity, and it's all about understanding some of the challenges within the legal profession in general, not just the criminal justice, but legal profession in general with neurodiversity. And they're brilliant, absolutely amazing. They have to keep me in check a lot because I'm far more ADHD and impulsive and all over the place, where they're far more, this is the law, things have to be accurate. And I sometimes upset them, but yeah, if you that would be amazing, because this is the challenge, is to get people to care enough for us to sort of get it in there. So anything you can do around that.
How does Guide address the mental health and well-being of individuals with ADHD in custody, considering the potential impact of confinement and stress?
Yeah, so it does talk about some of the, as I say, it talks about the sort of traits of the condition and that sort of things, but it does talk about some of those sort of challenges that someone might face and how it might, you know, present, and what we can do, and what people in like police custodies can do to sort of mitigate those challenges. And again, it's things like movement breaks and try not to keep people locked up too long, and that kind of thing, because a lot of these things are quite simple. They're what we would describe in the workplace as reasonable small adjustments, but they can make an absolute world of difference to someone who, is in distress and has a neurodivergent condition or a vulnerability. So yeah.
What role does a guide play in promoting fair and equitable treatment for individuals with ADHD within the criminal justice system?
So by identifying some of the traits of ADHD can get people into trouble, and then allowing people to sort of advocate for themselves in terms of support, but also how much of a difference, like around being able to give eloquent answers, is a small like focus break gonna make. And fundamentally, as I sort of said earlier on, if I'm interviewing someone, I want them to be able to give the clearest, best account possible. And if they are struggling because they've lost focus, or they are, they need to stim, or any of the things that you and I might struggle with, if we were like sat there in a stressful situation, then they're not going to be able. It's not fair. It's fundamentally, it's not equitable, is it? That's kind of what we're talking about here. We're talking about giving people the best opportunity to give their account and have the fairest time in custody, I guess, if that makes any sense.
How can the guide be used to advocate for policy changes and reforms that better support individuals with ADHD in custody?
A lot of what is in the guide is the sort of stuff that should be happening in police stations anyway. So some of the things it sort of talks about is having quiet cells and custody areas, and having access to sort of fidget toys and things like that. And I'm really always conscious when I talk about things like fidget toys, people might hear that and think, what a ridiculous thing to say if I've been nicked. But how much of a difference? I mean, I talked about stimming earlier on, the fact that I do it a lot. If I was locked up for 4 hours and I wasn't able to stim, I'm going to be a completely different person, fundamentally. And if we can make again, it's small changes. Nottinghamshire Police have built custody suites that are neurodiverse friendly. They have different lighting. They're able to dim the lights. They've got slightly nicer colours on the walls. And again, to a neurotypical person, well, how would that make a difference? But you and I know that can make a huge difference to someone's experience. And all of these things are in the guide. And I'd like to think that the guide wouldn't we wouldn't have had to write this if these things existed already, because this is about educating people to be able to answer things. But fundamentally, that's what police should be doing. They shouldn't be having to go out their way. And that's kind of, you can argue that's the same for reasonable adjustments in workplaces and society. But yeah, so if you did all the things in here, we'd have a wonderful, easier, better experience for neurodivergent people.
Yeah, it'd be butterflies and fairies.
It would
What
actually.
what feedback or impact have you received? Impact? No, what feedback have you received from individuals, professionals, or organizations who have utilized the guide in their work with individuals with ADHD in custody?
Thus far, all of the feedback has come back has been positive, but the issue we have is it's most of the feedback has come from organisations like the Appropriate Adult Network, who see it as something they can have in their library as almost a resource, which is great. And the College of Policing have seen it, and they're talking about making it a resource for their library. And these are all wonderful things, but fundamentally, the challenge is to actually get it in the hands of people that are regularly coming into police stations, and that's what we need to try and do next. So the feedback is good, but we just need to sort of make that step of getting it actually in and getting used regularly, and that's the challenge, because police forces are, we talked about culture change stuff earlier on, change is bad, and what is this you're trying to do? It is a challenge. So yeah, that's fundamentally what we need to do.
And before we wrap up, is there anything else you would like to say or mention about any work that is coming up for you?
Yeah, well, the only other bit, as I say, I've got my fingers in many pies around neurodiversity and criminal justice system. One of the other things that I've been involved in, and is quite interesting, and I mentioned earlier on, is this statistic about people in prison. I've been involved in the implementation of a screening pilot for ADHD in the City of London Police. Now, I work for the Metropolitan Police, which is in London, but what a lot of people don't realise is there's a square mile in London, which is the City of London Police. So quite a small little independent force. Don't get me started as to why. Long story, very weird.
A whole
But
different breed.
they have been using this guide since May. The screening since May, and the results have come back are really quite interesting, because I said there's this 25% figure of people in prison, but from this voluntary, and that's the only issue, it is voluntary. People who come into police stations are asked if they'd like to do the questionnaire. 63% of people who've done it have come back as either probable or highly likely to have ADHD. And I think that's quite telling. And this is the thing, if we want to make fundamental changes to the criminal justice system, it's important to maybe have a data set to be able to sort of use to get the government to make these reforms and changes. And that's something cool. That's a cool piece of work. And we're trying to get other forces to come on board. Cumbria Police are looking to do it in January, and there are some other forces who are interested as well. And that's not to take away from the other neurodivergent conditions. In an ideal world, everyone's needs would be met. The reason we're focused on ADHD, because I think it's the traits of ADHD are the ones that are more likely to get people into trouble. And that's why we started there. But fundamentally, we'd like to see it across neurodivergency, across all police stations. So that's a cool piece of work. And yeah, again, so you can Google that. If you Google City of London ADHD pilot, the BBC News stories and all that will come up. I'm not massively mentioned in it, if at all, because I don't think they want to credit someone from the Metropolitan Police. But a lot of the contacts and that came from my work running the ADHD Alliance side of things. So yes, big part, small mention. Hey ho, I don't care. I'm not in this for the fame and glory. I'm in this for getting people help, and that's what it's all. And that's it. But otherwise, just want to thank you and the work you're doing, and what a lovely experience it was to talk to you. Nice smiley face.
Oh, thank you.
Mm.
And you know what? And thank you so much for being such an incredible guest, for sharing your invaluable expertise and insights.
Oh,
Your
God.
dedication as a co-chair of the ADHD Alliance, the co-secretary of an ADHD adult charity, and the trustee of ADHD Liberty truly shines through all the work that you're doing. And we hope that this episode has shed light on the challenges faced by neurodivergent individuals in the criminal justice system and provided guidance for supporting individuals with ADHD when in custody. Remember, by embracing your uniqueness and advocating for change, we can create a more inclusive and supportive society. So, stay iconic, and we'll see you next time.